Welcome to my session about unleashing the power of hybrid management with PowerShell and Azure Arc. So just a quick round of hands. How many people know what Azure Arc is? So almost a full room, that's great. Before we start diving into the content, just first want to say a huge thank you to the sponsors for making this event possible. Make sure to go and talk to them during the breaks. My name is Jan Egil. I work as a cloud solution architect at Microsoft, and I'm also a core maintainer on the Arc Jumpstart project. How many people have heard about Arc Jumpstart before? A few hands. Great. So we're going to use that and talk a little bit more about what it is during the session. But first, for those not familiar with Arc, let's just also give a quick one-on-one on Azure Arc. Because as you know, while we have this cloud-first approach in many scenarios, it's not something that can be used in every customer scenario, right? Customers have to stay hybrid for many reasons, as you can see here: compliance, security, services running at the edge, and so forth. So we need to manage the services where they are. So the focus for this session today is going to focus on Arc-enabled servers, meaning that we can manage both Linux and Windows servers across many different locations, including other clouds like AWS, GCP, and so forth, our own data centers, and last but not least, our edge locations, production plants, and so forth. So what this makes possible for us is basically when you Arc enable the infrastructure, in practice, in the context of servers, we install an agent, register the server to the Arc control plane. That unlocks a lot of opportunities when it comes to management, security, monitoring, and all of the things that you can see on top here. So the focus for today's session is to have a look at where or what PowerShell capabilities can we use to manage our servers based on the server being Arc enabled. So as part of the demo today, we are going to leverage the Arc Jumpstart. If you have not used it before, I'll also have this link in the resources at the end. It's basically a way for you to get started with a sandbox environment. So we have this solution called ArcBox that will bootstrap a simulated on-premise environment or an environment running outside of Azure in a sandbox environment, so you can play around with it, tear it down when you're not using it anymore. So I'm going to get back to that in a minute. But before we dive into the demos, I also just wanted to set the stage on how the architecture looks like on the connected machine agent. So here we have a drawing architecture diagram. On the left-hand side, we have the Arc connected machine agent, and on the right-hand side, we have the Azure control plane. And as you can see here, it's communicating with a lot of different cloud services. For example, for authentication, we use Microsoft Entra ID. There we can enforce things like multi-factor authentication, use of passkeys, and a lot of other capabilities. But you can see that the agent itself, it has a lot of different components. The instance metadata service that sends the heartbeats every few seconds so that we know that the agent is alive. The guest configuration agent, which is the heart of the Azure Machine Configuration integration that we're going to talk about. But the most powerful is the extension manager. So we can see here that we have multiple different extensions that can be installed on top of the Arc agent. Custom script extension, we're going to talk about that. All of the other services, we're not going to talk so much today about, because we're going to focus on the automation capabilities for PowerShell Write. And in previous sessions today, we saw that the PowerShell team, Steven and company, talked a lot about OpenSSH and how that is an important building block also in the Windows ecosystem, that it's now being included in Windows Server 2025. By default, it's enabled. So you can see here the architecture in context of Arc-enabled servers that makes it possible to use the agent as a proxy to run commands, to invoke automations on the machines via the agent. So you can see on the bottom left here, we have the client or the caller application. So in this case, this can be Azure CLI, it can be PowerShell, or anything talking to the Azure Resource Manager. Then we have the proxy component, which is on the client side, talking to the Azure Relay service and the GNS. GNS stands for Global Networking Services, the networking backbone in Azure, basically, which communicates with the agent, the Arc connected machine agent, which is in this case acting as a reverse proxy. So you don't have to open anything inbound to the Arc-enabled machine. Everything will go via this agent. And then you, of course, have all of the authentication provided by EnterID as the security measurements to be allowed to run these commands. For example, you can use conditional access to enforce that this can be used only from privileged access workstations, as an example. So I just wanted to give that context before we dive into the demos. So now we're going to transition over to our demo environment for today. Also, first wanted to explain a little bit about the demo environment. As I said, we're going to use the Azure Arc Jumpstart ArcBox for IT pros. And we also have an architecture diagram explaining how this looks like when you have deployed it in Azure. Let me see, you don't see the other screen, so let me just fix that. There we go. So here you can see the architecture diagram of ArcBox IT Pro architecture. So basically, this is a template that you get access to as part of the Arc Jumpstart. You can deploy it either using, as you can see here, our template or Bicep, or if you go to the documentation website, we also have this deploy to Azure button, so you can just deploy it from the portal without doing any infrastructure as code. So that template will deploy on our resource group. Within that resource group, it will, if you go to the bottom, it will first of all set up an Azure virtual network where our virtual machine is going to live. And this ArcBox client VM, which is running 2025 server with Hyper-V enabled on it, makes it possible to create these nested virtual machines, right? So that we have 3 Windows servers, a couple of Linux boxes, one of the Windows machines have SQL enabled, so it's possible to explore the Arc-enabled SQL capabilities. So this is the environment we're going to play around with today, but you can also use this for generic exploration of Azure Arc, right? If you want to play around with any of the services you can see on top here. So I already have this deployed in my environment. If you go quickly into the Azure portal, go into Azure Arc, click on Machines. Here we should see the demo environment, right? So we have those 5 machines. So those are the ones we're going to play around with for the demos today. If you scroll a little bit down here, it's just I'm going to share all of these notebooks and scripts in the conference repository later on. So if you want to be able to deploy this in a repeatable manner, you can use the Bicep templates, right? And then you have the commands here on how I deploy this for this session. Also direct link to the documentation, which covers a lot of the content I'm going to go through today with screenshots and step-by-step instructions. So first, let's have a look at what we're going to see in this session. We already talked a little bit about Azure Arc on a high level, what it is. We have looked a little bit on Jumpstart and ArcBox specifically. We have other solutions available in the Jumpstart as well. So LocalBox for playing around with Azure Local, Kubernetes scenarios, and so forth. But today we're focusing on ArcBox. So the first scenario we're going to dive into is how can we do execution of PowerShell on Arc-enabled servers. So we have a few options there depending on the context, right? What are we doing? So the first one we're going to delve into is the custom script extension that we saw on the architecture diagram before. Then we're going to have a look at the run command feature. It's currently in preview, but we're going to see how it looks like in practice. Also back to the SSH, it's actually possible to use PowerShell Remoting via SSH that is being proxied via the Arc-enabled connected machine agent. We're going to have a look at that in practice. and also how we can connect to an Arc-enabled machine via the remote SSH extension. That is also pretty useful in interactive usage. And we're going to end the session with looking at more at-scale execution of PowerShell on Arc-enabled servers. So then we're coming into Azure Automation as one of the scenarios that you can use hybrid workers with the Arc connected machine agent. We're going to touch upon machine configuration and also talk a little bit about the DSC 3.0, which was mentioned in the State of PowerShell session earlier today. So let's start off with the custom script extension. First of all, let's just set up the variables for our environment to get ready for the first demo here. So the custom script extension, it's typically used when you do post configuration tasks, right? Let's say that you have just configured a new server and you have to do some initialization to bootstrap, install some ad hoc command based on command line scripts that you have in your environment. But this is typically something that you do only during provisioning, right? So it's basically part of the deployment procedure. So to deploy this, we can also have a look in the portal. Let's go and have a look at the 2025 machines, for example, and just see here under extensions how it looks like. So here we can see that we have some extensions already deployed for monitoring, security, hybrid worker, and so forth. But here, if we go in and add a new extension, we can go ahead and add this custom script extension via the portal. But of course, we want to do this via PowerShell instead. So if we go back here and have a look here, we can see that we set up the machine name to be the 2025 VM that I just had a quick look at. And we can go ahead and run it. This could also be deployed. In this case, I'm deploying it via a command that I'm just writing here in the command parameter, just hello world basically. I'm grabbing some information. But if this was a long script, this would be kind of inconvenient, right? So the alternative here would be to point to a blob storage account that could be, of course, protected by private endpoint, so it can only be accessed via VPN or ExpressRoute, for example, in Azure, and run that way. So let's go back to the portal, do a quick refresh, and here we should see now that we have gotten the custom script extension. It has succeeded, so any error messages would be shown here. And if you go back here, you can also see in the output here if the standard output is also being outputted here. So this is a kind of a quick and easy way to run some ad hoc scripts, but as I said, mainly used for initial deployment purposes. The key limitation with this approach, which is if you're going to run multiple scripts, right? If I were to use this as kind of to run ad hoc scripts during operations or running scripts at scale after initial deployment, we would get this error message, right? That only one extension of this type is permitted. So it's not really intended for use with post-deployment operations. You could do it if you just remove the one that you have already run and run it again. So you can do it, but it's we really have a better ways to do that. And that's where this new run command on Arc-enabled servers comes into the picture. So it have a lot of features that is not present in the custom script extension. So as mentioned, you don't need any direct access to the server because it will be proxied and sent to the machines via the agent. Supported on both operating system platforms mentioned here, and integration with the role-based access control, right? So you can limit really what users and groups in your environment are allowed to do this. Maybe you want to allow it for some machines, but not tier 1 machines, for example. This have expanded set of use cases. Some examples here, troubleshooting if there is some need to do some password rotation, or there is a 0 day that you need to run some command to flip a registry setting or something along those lines at scale, then this could be a good candidate to perform that action. So you can use the Azure CLI to run this for those who are preferring that. But of course, now we're on the PowerShell conference, so we are going to just leave this as a reference for those who prefers the CLI, and have a look at the AC.connected machine agent. At the time of this presentation, this is the current version, so I just hard-coded it to make sure that it's working on the demo environment that I have used. Do the same thing here, set up the variables for the target machine. In this case, I'm using the same machine, the 2025 one. And here you can also see that we have commands to initiate it. We can also, before we do that, go quickly back into the portal. If you scroll down here under operations, you can see that we have run command. It's also listed clearly here that it's in preview. So during the preview, it's not supported to do the creation of the run commands from the portal. So if you click on these links, you will basically be taken to the documentation for the API. So at some point in the future, you can also click here to go to the documentation to see more information on all of the things I'm going to show you now. But at some point in the future, when this goes into general availability, the plan here is to provide a portal experience as well, right? So that you can create the run command objects here. You can probably also, I would imagine, similar to Azure Automation runbooks, right? That you can get the output stream, the error stream, and so forth. So you have kind of a visual operations possibility if that is preferred. But for the sake of this demo, we're going to use PowerShell. In this case, initiate a new operation to run on the target machine, just getting some information about the processes on the machine as an example. Here you can see that we have to give it a name, because here we can create multiple instances of run commands, so we can give them some logical name. And what I usually do here is I also add the as_job parameter, because if you don't specify this one, it will run synchronously, and it can take some time for the command line to return, because it have to send the information to the agent, wait for it to process the script, and wait for it to return the standard output and standard error. So let's just run this with the as_job, and then you can see we get a job object back, so we can track it, run get job to keep track of what has been initiated on the machines. So in order to not have to wait, I have already run one instance of this beforehand. So if you just run the get command to retrieve existing objects on this specific machine, you can see here now that we have two objects that are already available. One which I've run beforehand, which has now succeeded. The other one is currently running as being created. And in order for us to have a look at the output, we're going to have a look at the one that has already succeeded, right? So let's have a look at this one, which is succeeded. And then we can scroll up a little bit, and then you can see all of the information about what script we have run. And you also get on the instance view output property, you get the output of the command that you have been running. And here you can, of course, drill down using select object, expand property, and get just the output, so that you get the information that you are after. Let's do the correct name, and then you can see this is basically the standard output that you would expect. You can also clean up the object when you no longer need to work with the output. So that is something that needs to be done consciously. Same thing on Linux, it works the exact same way, but in this case we have to run bash commands, right? So in this case, just running the PS command to list active processes on the machine. Here I have also run it once beforehand, so let's just define the correct machine name and run this. Here you can see that we have one that is succeeded. We can also kick off another one to do it in the same way, and it will pop up in a few seconds here, and we can see that it will be there. But let's have a look at the one that have already been run. And as we can expect, here you have the output of the PS command in this example. Just like with custom script extension, we can also have the source script in blob storage. We can also redirect the output to blob, because based on the script that you're running, this might output a lot of information, right? And there is a limitation of 4 kilobytes that you can output. So if you have some scenarios where that will be a limitation and you find it inconvenient to parse it from here, you can redirect the output to a blob storage instead and process that in a different way. I also added some information here about the additional relevant parameters. We already talked about as job, but you also have other ones that is no wait, for example, just kick off the command and return immediately without having to wait for the Azure Resource Manager to kick off the job and wait for it to complete and so forth. So it's just good to know of these options. As I said, for my demos, I typically just use as job, so I can run get job, and then you can see that we have these job objects in the background here and can track them asynchronously. Also, just set up a quick comparison here about how the experience is and what the features are with run command versus custom script extension. But in a nutshell, as I said, custom script extension is mostly useful for post-deployment configuration, while this one can be used more on a on-demand basis, basically. So also more information available in the documentation there. Also, as I mentioned, you might not want to allow this on all of your machines, because you might have so-called tiering, that you have domain controllers, for example, PKI servers, which might be defined as tier 0 machines, and you don't want the possibility for some cloud service like Azure Arc to be able to execute commands on your server. So then you can run this command ACCMagent config locally on the box, and this is a command that you can run even before you onboard the server to Arc, so it will be impossible from the cloud side of the house to initiate and override the possibility to run to use the run command feature in this case. But we also have other parameters here for really restricting what will be possible. So you can either do allow listing or blacklisting. So if you, for example, just want to use the Arc enabled agent to allow Azure Monitor, for example, on the domain controllers, then you can go ahead and block all of the others, or allow just that one. So that was run command and custom script extension. Next, we're going to deep into the SSH access. So as I said, this requires no inbound openings in the firewall. Everything will be reverse proxied via the Arc agent. You don't need any direct line of sight from the machine that you are executing this from. So in this case, I'm using admin workstation, right? It could be my local machine for that matter, as long as I have access to the Azure Resource Manager to set up the connection. There are a couple of authentication methods available, so I'm going to showcase both of them. Then we're talking about the authentication methods in the operating system on the target machine. Also on the Azure side, we have role-based access control, right? So for Linux servers where you can use RBAC inside of the operating system, you can decide based on which Azure role you grant the user, whether it will have root access or just a regular user account with the RBAC. And this you can, of course, combine with the privileged identity management in Azure, so that if someone wants to have the root access, another user needs to approve it, for example. You can do those kind of things with PIM. So let's have a look, also just for your convenience, links to the documentation if you're going through this exercise yourself later on. Also, again, if you want to use the Azure CLI, there is an extension that you need to install before you get access to the AC SSH commands. In our case, we're going to use the ac.ssh PowerShell modules to run the demos. So I already have them pre-installed in my case. You also have to make sure that the SSH is enabled on the target device. So on the Linux side of the host, that is typically enabled by default, right? The agent is running and it's a core part of the operating system. So as was mentioned in the session earlier today, that is also kind of the direction that we are taking on Windows, so that SSH will be even tighter integrated, as we see in 2025, that the feature is already installed, but it's not enabled remote access. So you have to explicitly enable remote, the firewall rules and so forth. But if you're going to install this on previous operating systems like 2022, for example, then you have to first install the capability or the server feature, make sure that it's started and set it to automatic, as well as enable the relevant firewall rules. So that is, all of these things are done on the servers that are pre-configured in ArcBox. So including the 2022 and 25 machine, everything is pre-configured, so it's ready to play around with. On Linux, it's just a matter of checking if the SSHD service is currently running, which it is on the Ubuntu machines that we have in the demo environment. Let's go ahead, and here I have also, as you can see, included both the Azure CLI and the PowerShell variant. So let's just use enter ACVM to go into the 2025 machine to see how the experience looks like. There you can see that it's preparing the SSH connection, setting up the Arc proxy component on the local machine, and in this case I haven't set up any public or private keys for SSH authentication, so that's why it's falling back to password authentication. We'll get back to that in a minute. So that means I need to enter my credentials. Here I could of course also authenticate using an Active Directory user if this was a domain joined machine. So here we can see that now I'm inside of the target machine and I can execute commands just like I'm in the local environment, proxied via the SSH agent. And of course you could go ahead and start PowerShell and use that in the regular way. But let's exit out of this one. And next, I also just wanted to quickly mention that we have the option to use remote desktop protocol proxied via the Arc agent. So it's just as simple as adding -rdp to the command. Let's just rerun it again, because when you work with Windows, right, there are scenarios where we are working with legacy software. You need to go into the box in order to start some administration console and so forth. And then you would like to have the ability to use the remote desktop. So here you can see that it's prompting me to enter the credentials for the local administrator account. And here you can see that it will pop up an RDP session to the Arc-enabled machine without any direct network access. And you can see on the top here it says localhost, and that's because it's proxying the command via the local machine. So if you have a quick peek in a different window, if you keep this one running and open just a terminal session, here you can see that it sets up a dynamic port, in this case 62850, but it will just find a free available dynamic port and use that. So in practice, this RDP window is going into localhost and this port that you can see here, the remote port. So let's exit out of this one and move on to the Linux side of the house. Here we have a different username and a different name of the machine. First thing we're going to try is to simply connect using a local user, similar to what we did on the Windows machine. And here you can see we're into the box. We can start PowerShell if it's pre-installed, as it is in the ArcBox scenario. Yeah, as I already said, on one of the machines, on the Ubuntu 02 machine, I have already copied the public key for my local SSH key pair into that box. So in this case, I would expect it to not prompt me for the credential. So let's have a look. And there we go, we were let in without entering any manual password. Of course, you would typically also protect your private key with the password and get prompted for that in the session. But for Linux also we have support for Entra authentication. So let's go back into the portal again and have a look at the Ubuntu 02 machine, I believe. If you go to this connect option under settings, you can see that we don't have to learn the syntax manually. We can just go to this box in the portal. We get the syntax, and here we can provide what authentication type you want to use, key-based, password, or Entra. Here you can also retrieve the keys from a key vault, right? So you don't have to mess around with that manually. And if you click the connect in browser button here, what is going to happen is that it will open Cloud Shell in the browser so that you can connect to the machine without having any tools installed locally. So that can also be pretty convenient in some scenarios, right? If you are not using your own machine, to be able to go into the environment in an easy fashion. Or you could just copy the command here, go back to the command line, paste it in there, and that's basically the same thing that I did before, right? But the key thing to showcase here, if you are going to use the Entra integration so that you get logged into the operating system with your Entra account, you need to do a couple of things first. The first one is to have installed the extension. So in this case, I have already installed it because it takes like 3-4 minutes to install. So I didn't want to wait for that. So it's just basically going in here, installing it. It's not being rebranded to Entra yet, but that's the one you want. And the second thing you want is to go into access control and do the role assignments, right? So if you go into job function roles here, you can see that I have already added virtual machine administrator login to my user account, but here you could obviously add groups instead of my user, and as I said, you can use privileged identity management to have the user first elevate to be able to do this. But in this case, everything is set up beforehand. So let's have a look. Here is also the command to install the extension programmatically if you want to automate it, of course. The same thing with the role assignment. You can also do that from the command line. But let's try it out in practice. So the only difference here is that I have now removed this local user parameter, right? So I run this exact same command, but I just removed local user. Let's just go ahead and run this. And just with the previous example, I should not be prompted for a password, right? It should just log me in with the same command that I have logged into with the Connect AC account. So if I run who am I, then you can see that this is the username for my Entra ID user. So it will automatically configure this inside of the operating system so that my user can be used there. And the last thing I wanted to showcase on SSH is PowerShell Remoting via SSH, which I think is a pretty cool feature. Then you get all of the native PowerShell experience, right? So for those of you of us, which I suppose is most of the people in the room who have used remoting before, you are used to using all of this core PowerShell remoting, commandless, new PS session, enter PS session. All of these things will be available via the Arc agent SSH proxy. So let's have a look at how this can work. So the first thing we need to do here is first to export an SSH configuration that can be used by new PS session to set up the session. Then we have to, of course, create as a session object, and then we can just use it as we are used to with the usual commands. So let's have a look at how this can look like. So if you scroll down here, same thing here. I have not set up all of the machines with pre-configured SSH keys, so I will be prompted for the password. That's why I have enabled that password. Put it into the clipboard to avoid manual typing while talking. I'm really bad at doing that. So here you can see that I'm just retrieving all of the machines from the resource group. So you can see just getting the machines using PowerShell, storing them in the machines variable. And then I'm creating myself a sessions object or an array there to store the sessions that are being created. So let's go ahead and set this up. And also when in this case I set up some logic just to use the correct username, right? Because on Windows I'm administrator, on the Linux machines I'm the Jumpstart user. That is default in ArcBox. This export SSH command, it's going to create a configuration file that is stored locally, and in my case I'm just storing it in a temp folder and removing it afterwards, because I just need to get the information to use it inside of PowerShell. And after that, I'm doing some regular expressions to parse out the things that are applicable for my scenario. Because first, if you have a quick look at the documentation here, as you can see, if you zoom in a little bit, it first states that generate the configuration file. That will look something like this, the content of that file. And the proxy command that we are basically, that we are extracting using that regular expression is what we can find on the right hand side here. So it's basically the path to this relay info, and that's the file that contains the information necessary to connect to the target machine. And then we use the options parameter when we create a session using new PS session rights. We just add options, and inside of that options object, we point to the proxy command that where we got the information from this file that was generated by the previous command. So here I could probably have created some PowerShell function right to do this, but for the sake of the demo and show how things actually work, I just put it in the script so that you can see the full picture here. So for each of the machine, basically adding using new PS session and storing the objects into that variable. And as I said, I will be prompted for password for each of the machines here, since I didn't set up the keys beforehand. So let's just insert them for each of the machines, except for the one of the Linux machines, right? Because there I had already injected my public key. And you can also see the validity here. So the information stored in that file is only valid for 1 hour into the future. But in my case, I already delete it as part of the logic here, right? So it's not stored permanently on disk. It's only used in memory for this exact purpose. So here you can see now I have 5 PowerShell session objects available that can be used in the regular way. So let's just start with enter PS session, go into the first session here. So this works just like you are used to. It's also based on PowerShell 7, right? So you would need to have PowerShell 7 with PowerShell Remoting enabled on the target machines. That's also described in the documentation. It's basically one line that you need to add to the SSH config file to register PowerShell 7 as an SSH server, basically. All of the details are in the documentation that is linked above. So that means you can do things like run invoke command across all those sessions, right? So that you can do operations at scale. This was just a simple sandbox environment with 5 machines, but this could in theory be all of the machines that you have Arc enabled in the environment, right? And then you could do things like run local script. In this case, I just run the hostname command in that script.ps1, so it will just return the name of the machines and clean up the sessions as we are used to. Last thing I wanted to show on the SSH side of the house is how we can use VS Code and SSH-based remoting from there. So let's go ahead and create a configuration file for one of the machines. Here we are running the same command once again manually. Enter the password when it prompts me, or already did it. So here you can see the output of that configuration string. So this is basically what is needed in order to connect to that machine from VS Code. So here you can see, let's copy this to the clipboard, or we can also just add it to the config file that is inside of our user profile. So it's already pre-staged. Then you can use the remote SSH extension in VS Code. So the first thing you would need to do there, go into extensions, search for remote SSH. I already installed it. Then you can go to Remote Explorer and have a look at the remotes, the SSH remotes. So if you click here on the settings and have a peek into the configuration file, here you can see that the command I run added this. I have already added it manually, so you can just rename it with a more convenient name, right? So that's basically what I have done here. So that makes it possible to just right-click on the machine here and connect in a new window. If you are connected before, it will also list the directories that you opened in the past. So let me just connect to that one. So here you can see it's setting up the tunnel. It prompts me for the password since I didn't set up the keys. Enter those, and you can see in the bottom left there that it's opening the remote tunnel. So in a few seconds, when it have initialized the VS Code server on the remote machine, then all of the file system that you can see on the left-hand side is from that remote machine, right? So I can go directly into a PowerShell script that is locally on that machine, and here I can access, of course, the environment. It's just like a jump server, right? It's just that it's VS Code via SSH instead of RDPing into our jump server. So then you could do things like get AD user, work with SQL, work with everything that is available on that box. So I think this is a pretty useful opportunity to use for remote management. Also, Azure Automation hybrid workers, as I talked about before, you can use the Arc-enabled servers. So there is some extension for the hybrid worker feature in Azure Automation that can be installed on the Arc agents, and that makes it possible to run books right on the Arc-enabled server. So when we talk about more at-scale operations, you want to be able to schedule scripts or run books to run on for example, a daily basis, weekly basis for reporting purposes and so forth. Then you can go in and use Azure Automation as kind of the Azure service to upload all of your scripts into the various runbooks that you can have here. This can be Python scripts, it can be PowerShell scripts. And if you go into hybrid worker groups here, you will see that we have pre-created a hybrid worker with one worker inside of it, and that basically will install that hybrid worker extension that we saw on this machine right when we went into the extensions view. And what this enables is if we go into runbooks and let's say that we want to run this new AD user, it's just a dummy runbook basically, that's just simulating that we want to do something against Active Directory. If we start this runbook, we will have the option here to, instead of running on an isolated Azure sandbox that have only internet access, we can instead run it on a hybrid worker. Select the group, and now we have only one, and then it's going to execute this runbook on that specific machine. And on the left-hand side here, you can see that we have the option to set up schedules. We can set up webhooks if we want the possibility to trigger this from other systems for various integrations, right? So just leave this, we have a lot of examples here on how to set up runbooks for various scenarios, how to enable that hybrid worker extension programmatically via PowerShell and so forth. So I'll just leave that there as an for example. Same thing with setting up integration with Azure Monitor at scale so that you can do things like automated remediations if there is low disk space on a server, for example, and Azure Monitor triggers an alert. Then you can integrate with Azure Automation, trigger the runbook that is provided to clean up the disk space in predefined folders, for example. So there are a lot of possibilities to integrate here. And the other option to do things at scale is to use Azure Machine Configuration. So we don't have time in this session to deep dive into this. This would be its own session. But in Arc Jumpstart, we have a dedicated scenario for creating managed machine configurations, both for Windows and for Linux. So you will get step-by-step instructions on how to run this inside of the ArcBox environment. And there we have a couple of examples, right, with a sample configuration for doing things in DSC v1, DSC v2 like you are used to. But as was mentioned before earlier today, this will also eventually evolve into DSC 3.0, right? So that you can write these configuration objects inside of Bicep instead of PowerShell as you have done today. So I also included some getting started information in this notebook that you can run through yourself after the configuration. Also have a session tomorrow where I'm going to dive into other DSC related content, Winget configuration and Microsoft DevBox. So check out my session tomorrow if you're more interested in that. So all of the things that you can see further down here, I will dive more into tomorrow. But the key takeaway here is at some point in the future, it will be possible to define the configurations in DSC 3.0 with Bicep, right? And that was also mentioned on the community call on June 19 by Jason Helmick on the Azure, or excuse me, on the PowerShell team, that this is something that they are investing in looking into for DSC 3.2 and going forward. So then you can use Bicep to author both the machine configuration policy definitions, assignments, and the DSC configuration itself. So let's summarize. Now we're getting close to time. Just have a quick look at what we have gone through. We looked at the overview of Azure Arc. We had a quick look into ArcBox. Oh, that's a quick way to spin up a sandbox environment. We started out looking at the custom script extension. Then we had a look at run command. And finally, we had a look at PowerShell Remoting and VS Code remote SSH extension inside of the context of PowerShell. We also briefly talked about the at-scale execution of PowerShell. Azure Automation makes more sense for those scenarios if you want to be able to schedule and integrate with other services like Azure Monitor or possibly other monitoring solutions as well. And then we closed off talking about machine configuration. So let's close out with the next steps. So here I have, just bring it up in full screen, the aka.ms link for the Arc Jumpstart. So this will take you to the landing page for Jumpstart, and then you just scroll down to ArcBox, and there you will find all of the information how to deploy it using the various deployment methods that I talked about. And there are also instructions on how to use PowerShell Remoting via SSH and so forth. I will also, as I said, upload all of the demo scripts and notebooks that you saw to the conference repository, so you can feel free to just deploy it and explore it in your own terms. Since you don't have time for any Q&A now, feel free to just grab me in the hallway or anytime during the conference to talk more about Arc-enabled servers and PowerShell automation, and enjoy the rest of the conference. Thank you very much.